Imagine you were the person tasked with leading change in your organization during one of the most economically uncertain times in living memory. Could you do it in a way that would grow the collective organization and bring people together? I'm delighted to be joined today by Darren Evans, a man who was faced with this exact remit less than 6 months into his new role as CEO of Calder Stewart, New Zealand's leading property and construction solutions provider. So let's find out more. Darren, welcome to In Good Company. Thank you ever so much for joining me all the way from New Zealand. How are you?
Good, thanks, Dan. Yourself?
Yes, very well, thank you. And it's I think you are officially geographically our furthest away guest. So we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule for spending some time with us today. So we're going to give our audience an opportunity to find out a little bit more about you. And so we always ask our guests the same question, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. Well, I'm a reformed accountant and lawyer who started his career in professional services, and then in 2012 decided it was time, post the Canterbury earthquake, to move out of Christchurch and head south to a place called Dunedin, where I joined a company called Calder Stewart, which is about 170 people based in a town in Milton, South Otago, and looked after the HR, IT, health and safety functions. I've worked all around the world. I've worked in the UK and Hong Kong, as well as New Zealand. And so, I had a sort of a wide berth of experience, mainly in providing consulting and assurance advice to different organisations. So that was my background. In terms of being a leader, well, I guess that started for me very early on at school. I used to be a reading tutor, which helped kids who were struggling to read. And then I got involved in the university hiking club and learned a lot of my leadership skills through walking through the New Zealand bush and the mountains. So that does focus your mind on what it needs to be a leader, which I then took into my working world.
Yeah, well, I was saying just before we hit record on this that I'm a big fan of New Zealand. I spent 3 months there as when I was traveling around the world a long time ago. Well, it feels like a long time ago, back in 2008. And in fact, Dunedin, my sister lived there for a short time as well. So we've got a good few connections with New Zealand. And I wanted to kind of delve a bit deeper into your role as a leader, because as you mentioned, you were appointed CEO at Calder Stewart in October of 2019. And then, of course, less than 6 months later, something called the pandemic hit. I don't know if you heard of it.
Yes,
so what did that do to you as a leader?
Well, it's the ultimate curveball. I certainly was a bit disbelieving down in our little old New Zealand, a long way from anywhere, that it would actually ever come to much. We'd had bird flu in Asia and places like that, which were close to home, but it really hadn't touched our shores. And then all of a sudden, we were in lockdown, and New Zealand's a reasonably easy place to lock down. You stop the aircraft arriving, and no one really can get here. We are an island a long way from anywhere else. So it was quite surreal, really. And again, so much uncertainty, and no one in our living memory had lived through one. And so the history books were many chapters back as to what happened with the pandemic, and all one knew at the start was that large loss of life was a real risk.
And I think it was slightly different, because when my sister was in New Zealand, that was when it actually hit. And of course, there was the question of whether she could get home or not, because she did. But she was saying that even like the hospitals were by and large empty by comparison by a lot of the rest of the world. So it was. I mean, it feels like a long time ago now, but it was a very strange time, wasn't it? But yeah. So during that time, then what? And of course, being in a new role and a CEO, of course, of this organization, did you have any particular leadership strategies that you had to call on at all? Or how did you show up and become like the best version of yourself that you and your organization needed?
Look, I think at that point in time, with so much uncertainty, you need to build confidence with people that we have a plan and that we'll get through this.
Yeah.
One of the things I've talked to a lot about people is, the bit of that in these last few years is the stocktail paradox. You got to believe, you got to confront your brutal reality and deal with it, which is the things you need to do. But be confident that you'll prevail in the end. One of the messages I said to people: we'll get through this. how we get through this will be, that will twist and turn on the journey. It'll be like walking down a river towards the sea. It never goes in a straight line. But you've got to communicate that vision to people. You've got to communicate regularly, because too much of a vacuum. So we, communicated sort of every few days initially, and then every second day after that, and schedule people when they're going to get an update. But also make sure you build a leadership team around you. You can't do everything as a leader. The key thing you often do as a leader is to make sure you're a central point of communication, so all messages are consistent, but then rally a team around you to actually deal with the underlying issues and problems, and making sure they're being addressed virtually, of course, because it was all done over screens and Teams calls. Of course, then as New Zealand, we got to come out reasonably quickly, albeit cautiously, because we'd locked down a country quite well. But that created a whole other lot of challenges once we came out the other side.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, really, in terms of it was such a challenging time for the whole planet, by and large. And with that, you kind of needed to lead your organization through that clear that word of the year, wasn't it? Unprecedented. So you needed to lead your team through an organization through that unprecedented change. How did you balance short-term goals with that still, because there's still the long-term vision exists? So how did you balance those together, and how did you kind of build that confidence with and trust within your team and stakeholders when you face these challenges?
Look, I think one of the things we had as an advantage is that we actually had a lot of work on. Construction has long-term contracts, so we could we needed to keep all our people, so that we could reassure them very quickly you had a job to come back to, because we needed our people to come out through the other side of that.
Yeah.
And then also message to the stakeholders, we've got this, we will be okay. We had to do a lot of making sure we had a lot of financial gunpowder. We entered into it in a strong financial position. Again, some of those things really help to make sure, if you're sailing a ship into uncertain waters, but you've got lots of provisions and lots of equipment to make repairs, then you can sail with confidence even if the storm clouds are gathering. So, you're making sure you're financially right-sized and have resources, and be a bit more cautious. Don't overstretch the organisation, but also paint a pathway forward, and just keep communicating that to people. People need to hear the same message many, many times to actually lock it in and to believe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And how, I'm kind of curious to find out how, for you personally, when it was around March 23rd or something, around then, for us at least, that the country went into lockdown. You're 6 months into a job. How did you feel when it was like, okay, the world's kind of gone upside down, and I've got this big job to do, that everybody's looking at me? How did that actually feel when it actually happened?
Yeah, look, you just got to, I guess I've been in a sort of a leadership role for a long period of time, and the first thing you just got to is keep calm, panic slowly. And New Zealand had quite good structures, and we could protect, as a nation, we weathered it pretty well. I'd actually say that the COVID hangover effects are being more challenging as a leader than probably the period in COVID in New Zealand, mainly because actually as a country we had a lot of structure and we were quite ring-fenced. But once the COVID pandemic has passed, it's actually been the after effects which have challenged us in a leadership space a lot more, particularly as you get the different waves that people are unified and follow the rules and supportive for the first period of time. But how do you build that momentum over later periods? And that goes the same in business. That when there's a crisis, people rally around, but when there's lots of crises coming, which is what the world has been post-COVID,
sure.
That's probably the bigger challenge from a leadership perspective. One single crisis is easy. A multiple of ongoing crises is harder to rally people to it.
Yeah. And so how are you finding that then at the moment, then, with the many crises and challenges?
I think that's the bigger challenge for us, because post-COVID we had a wall of work. Post-COVID, then we had a supply chain disruption. Of course, we felt it pretty acutely because we're the bottom of the earth. So we're the last place you want to send a ship. Why would you service 5 million when you can service 50 million people? So we had a lot of changes there, and then we had an acute labour shortage because New Zealand actually have had a lot of short-term working holiday visas, migrant visas, and through COVID we lost 160,000 people. So at the same time, New Zealand was booming post-COVID. We came out of 2020, 2021 exceptionally confident, huge levels of investment, and an oversupply of money. So people were building things left, right, and centre. So we had a wall of work, and that created its challenges, more challenges than probably COVID actually did. You
Yeah.
didn't have stuff to build, you didn't have people to build, and you signed a contract, and the skill levels were dropping.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so that's in some ways been a big challenge. And now we're really into that period of hangover. So we have, like a team which has climbed Mount Everest, we've come down, we're kicking around base camp and actually motivating and challenging and keeping people engaged through this next period of time. We're not off to climb K2 is actually probably the bigger challenge.
Yeah.
The ongoing fatigue of leaders and leadership and constant firefighting.
I really like what you said before, which I've written down because I feel like I could probably use a bit of that approach, which is panic slowly. I think that's a really nice way of putting it, because I panic quickly at a lot of things. So I really like that. I wanted to also briefly, and we don't often do this on this podcast because it's not necessarily because Calder Stewart and are a client of Impact, but we don't often get people, our clients, to talk about their experiences, because that's not really what this podcast is about. However, I'm going to ask you a little bit about the experience we're working with Impact. So yeah, you actually decided that during the pandemic was the time to lead an organizational wide transformation project. During that time, I guess a lot of CEOs were probably keeping their heads down, managing budgets and keeping stakeholders happy. So what was your driver to implement that organizational change during that time?
Well, I think it started probably in late 2019, the idea. And
Okay.
we're a business with lots of different silos to it. And we were creating a transformation around values and systems and processes. But underpinning that was a need to actually grow our leadership capacity. Construction is very transactional. It's very project space. It's very focused on the management aspect. Project management, of course, is something that construction goes to its very core, but it's quite transactional. We want to be transformational, which means you actually had to move into that people space and give our leaders new tools for their toolkit. So Tim and our people and capability manager, Cheryl Jenkins, and I, we traveled up and down the country, and we got feedback from our frontline people. What were those things that they wanted to see from our leaders? And that actually built through to a business case which actually went to the board around the time of the pandemic first hitting and lockdown occurring. And my pitch to the board was really simple. This is a crisis we're going through. We don't know where it's going to end, but it's about rebuilding the organization on the other side. So what better time to invest in your leaders and those people who are going to carry you both through the crisis, but rebuild the organization on the other side? And they backed it, because it's actually those people, if you're going into an uncertain future and challenging times, that's when you need to reinforce your leadership toolkits of your key people so that they can rally the organization and grow the people on the other side of the crisis. Don't wait. Don't do it before. Do it to get out the other side.
It's a good way of putting it, and it's fascinating to hear that kind of in a bit more detail, because there is actually a full case study and kind of that we can go into more detail there, which we'll post links in at the end. But I was curious, what are there any particular strategies that you found effective in aligning and transforming that culture during these periods of change?
Look, I think you've got to have a coalition of leaders at the top. That's Cotter's model, and that is so true. Nothing is achieved by one person; it's always achieved by a team. So you need to build that unified vision and get everyone to buy into it, where we're going and why we're doing it. But then you need to make forums where people can connect. So we started with our senior leadership team on the leadership journey because we knew if our senior leaders weren't on the boat, sailing in the same direction, they wouldn't be effective in implementing change. And there's two things which come from a leadership program. The first is giving people tools to lead themselves, lead their teams, and lead change. But the second most important thing you get out of an outcome is the ability for leaders to build connections between themselves. And day-to-day work, people don't get that. And it's those connections, those relationships, those shared experience of being challenged and transformed themselves through the program enable people to build a deeper connection to achieve real change in the organisation. So we get half our benefit from bringing our people together, putting them in different scenarios and different situations, being vulnerable, and through that process, they learn how they can collaborate, cooperate, and unite. And that's a hugely empowering part of a leadership program, in addition to the raw skills and tools each person takes away.
And what results have you seen from that work?
Well, the key thing is it taught the importance of leaders growing other leaders. And so then the first year was probably 2 cohorts of about 28 people, maybe a bit less than that. We then did a second round, and empowered and driven by the senior leaders for the middle management and the frontline leaders. So 4 cohorts of 16, so about 74 people we put through, because it's the middle. We're a very flat organisation, so your middle is your engine room. So we want to create a whole lot of leaders right across the organisation. But the big outcome is you train leaders, they learn that the key responsibility of leadership is leading into growing others.
Yeah.
And then it cascaded down. And this year is our third module we've done, which is our Future Leaders program, which again was who's joined our organisation, who really has the raw talent, and how do we empower them with more tools to lead the next generation of leaders.
It sounds like it's landing really well, which is good, and it sounds like from what you said, that the organisation is kind of bought into it, and that which I think can be quite tricky, right? I mean, I'm not a CEO, but I would imagine that it's quite tricky to kind of foster that culture of collaboration and innovation. What advice or what tips do you maybe have for any other CEOs or other members of our audience that might be listening to this, that to kind of have to foster that, as we've said, use that turn of phrase, foster that culture of collaboration and innovation? What advice would you give?
I think the advice I give is leadership programs give people the talent and tools to grow themselves, and then to grow other people. Then we gave them the opportunity to connect with each other. That is a way. You need to create a collaboration space for leaders to work together. And the third thing we did, which was really powerful, is we gave them business projects to collaborate on, something of meaningful change that impacted the Calder Stewart world each and every day, or impact in this round of leadership development, our future. Give them something to collaborate and practice those collaboration and innovation skills. It's like learning a new exercise at the gym. Someone needs to show you. You need to practice it several times, and then it will become muscle memory. It's the same here. Leadership is a skill you've got to keep practicing and keep using, and keep adding to. But you need a practical thing that you can celebrate success with. If you train for an event, it's the event which locks in the learning, whether it be a marathon, a climb up a mountain, a sailing journey across the sea. But you've got to practice that, lock it in, give the team an opportunity to collaborate, but let them collaborate on something which they touch day to day, because that will give them meaning, it will give them purpose, and it will give them a focus on actually achieving something which will change the way they work.
Yeah, absolutely. That learning by experience is so powerful, and essentially Impact built their business on that methodology of learning through experience. And so I'm in a very fortunate position where I do get the opportunity to meet our clients and kind of hear the stories that they have working with us, and we're always It's always amazing to kind of hear those stories and hear them played out in real life. And speaking of real life, that ability to kind of set projects that can directly have an impact, if to use that word, on the business itself is going to be so true to life and so kind of rewarding at the end if they kind of are able to work on it and see the results and keep close to it. So it's amazing to hear.
It also takes people the skill to transform and to think like executive leaders, which is to scan the horizon outside the organisation and then change the organisation internally to respond to the outside world.
Yeah.
So many leaders get caught in operations, and a good leadership development program gives them the ability and space to scan the outside world, to scan the organisation, and work out, how do we make this boat go faster? How
Yeah.
do we get to where we need to be? And you need to give people space. You need to give them time to collaborate, to innovate, and to work out how the future looks like. And then how do we as an organisation and a group of individuals within that organisation build that future?
And I'm going to ask you for a quick tip here. So my question is going to be, it's maybe starting with a bit of a scenario. So imagine there's a leader listening to this or watching this, and they've gone, "Yep, that sounds like something I want to get on board with. I want to engage my team, or I want to engage my organisation." What would be a Darren Evans quick top tip for leaders and how to create environments that inspire people and allow them to help them to achieve their full potential? That's putting you on the spot.
Think like a conductor of an orchestra. A
Oh, yeah.
conductor doesn't play a single note of music, but it empowers different sections of the orchestra to lead within their team, to come together to create a vision or a symphony on the other side from the collaboration. So again, think of a vision, think of a series of sub-projects, and then think about what the outcome that they could shape collectively and sell that vision. So to give an example of that, our latest leadership development program has been focused on our low carbon future. So we said to our group leaders, the 16, let's break you into 3 groups. You need to go and talk to our customers. You need to talk to our suppliers and subcontractors who are our partners in building buildings. And then you need to look at what processes you need to connect us as the organisation through that whole value chain, and come back and together collectively collaborate to say what's the plan across all 3 areas that we need to put into place to build a strong future in a low carbon world for our organisation.
Well, yeah, that's a good top. That all about empowerment and communication. I think I picked up on there as well. It's that can often be a good start, and having those powerful conversations with people can make just a massive difference, can't they? Sorry, go on.
Yeah, make your leaders play back to you that you're
Yeah.
developing what the future should look like, because they need to learn the skill of communication too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a big circle, isn't it? It all comes around again. Yeah. We've talked a lot in this episode about overcoming challenges, and I do have a bit of a challenging question for you, which is kind of centered around diversity. And I think it's probably no secret that the construction industry is not often renowned for diversity, perhaps, but it's diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging is definitely a hot topic within organizations all around the world. I had a quick look at the Our People page on Calder Stewart's website, and I did notice that of the 26 people that are featured on it, there are the majority men, and only 2 of them are women. And I just wondered, how do you, as in your organization, ensure that diversity and inclusion are integrated into your leadership practice and the overall company culture?
Yes. Oh, good question and challenging question. The construction industry has been very male dominated in New Zealand. It's the good thing is we are making change in that industry. So when I joined Calder Stewart over 10 years ago, we had 25 women in our 170-person team. We now have 100, so it's quadrupled over the last 10 years. And it really is a way of making sure that our future female leaders who show those right characteristics are given the right opportunity. So like all people, it's making sure everyone gets their role by merit, but we make sure we align people with our strengths and give those opportunities through. And that's what we're seeing as the organisation matures and the life cycles of leaders move on. There's a greater portion coming through because if you go back 25, 30 years, which would be, I guess, the senior leaders today in those construction functions, it wasn't very diverse. But as we're seeing transitional leaders, we're seeing that come through, seeing our female project managers coming through, female QSs, and over time that's going to progress up that pipeline of in the construction and property industry. And so the changes, it's speeding up, and in another decade, I think you'll see it get back to. And again, I trained in law. Law went through the same progression at the change. over time. And in terms of diversity, well, we've become very diverse because we've really had a lot of people migrate to New Zealand. So, and there's been some real benefits from that diversity. So we had a lot of people come to New Zealand after the Canterbury earthquakes, particularly
Yeah.
here. Or Filipinos, workers who have joined us and now been with us for over 10 years. So that's been a fantastic addition to our business. And that's actually meant some of our businesses which didn't perform so well have really benefited from their skill sets from overseas, particularly in our manufacturing businesses, which has gone exceptionally well since they joined the team. But that's made us think much more clearly about how we communicate, because English is a second language for a good portion of our workforce,
Yeah.
as is, I guess, the neurological diversity or learning diversity. Many people get into construction because reading and writing is not their thing. So we have to work out how do we communicate to people. So we actually have to go, well, we've got to communicate in pictures and videos. We've got to make stuff that is translated. We've got to simplify things. Health and safety is a core thing of construction and property, but how do we do it simply so everyone, regardless of what language they speak or their ability to read, can understand what they need to do to keep them safe at work?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well done, first of all, because I know that was a challenging question, and it's, yeah, it sounds like, because obviously you see so much on the surface, especially on a website and things like that, and it's not until you actually either are immersed in that world or you have conversations with the people that can kind of answer those questions until you actually find out more. So yeah, it's and I think what you said there is super interesting about the way that Calder Stewart's evolved over time, and the approach and the mindsets have changed, and that kind of having a more inclusive approach to diversity of thoughts, diversity of people, and that even just being aware and of change that's needed is the step in the right direction, isn't it? For sure, and recognizing that change is needed.
Great.
Yeah, so thank you for answering that. And you briefly touched upon it before. Speaking of challenges and crises, we are kind of in 2023, the climate crisis. Want to bring up, and it's not something that I would imagine most business leaders are ignoring. Maybe there are, but we as impacted a kind of global survey of over 500 CEOs and senior executives, and as one of the results of that survey was that 34% said that environmental responsibility was one of their biggest challenges. It sounds like you do agree with that, or do you think
Totally.
maybe there's a bigger challenge?
No, I actually believe that climate is the ultimate organisational and cross-organisational challenge for the next 25 years. It's huge. And it can not be solved by one organisation. So for us to deliver great climate positive property and building solutions, we must collaborate with our clients around their operational carbon footprint, what their choices are around embodied carbon. And then we are the conductor of an orchestra. We do a few things, we fabricate and build, but materials and things like that, and subcontractors like electricians or plumbers, they bring their own materials and people onto site. So what they do becomes a part of our solution. So it's the ultimate collaboration challenge, and it can't be solved by one organisation. So it's giving CEOs never more a chance to connect interorganisationally to deliver change. And it's also probably the fastest change that we've seen. So post-COVID, people thought, climate might go in the parking lot. Well, it's come out of the parking lot like a Ferrari F1, and it's racing through change. And things down here in New Zealand, as always, we're playing a little bit of catch-up cricket to keep up with the pace of change. But we export to the world. So our carbon footprint of our products and our supply chains that enable those products really matters as consumers become globally carbon conscious. It's the ticket to ride. If we can't manage our carbon, then we will have tariffs on our products at the borders of the EU. We won't get into the markets that we need to be successful as a nation. So we're also a very climate sensitive place. We're an island surrounded by a lot of water, with a lot of ice on our mountains and our glaciers. They are melting and retreating. We are going from subtropical to tropical in parts of the country, so cyclones are hitting. The infrastructure that needs resilience affects all of us in terms of our cost of living, our water supply. We are, we have earthquakes, but we also have floods and those things. So, and our wealth comes from agriculture, from viticulture, from tourism. So climate has a huge impact on all of those things. We as 5 million people probably can't change the overall, but we can do our bit, and that's always the Kiwi way of doing things. Do your bit.
For sure, and I that's interesting you say that, because I would say that it's interesting because although it might be a small population by comparison to many countries in the world, doesn't mean there can't be a sphere of influence. And I think that by virtue of the fact that you're clearly addressing things, other organizations hearing a CEO talk so passionately about the way that they approach, the way that you approach to the climate crisis, and the way that you're kind of doing your bit, as you quite rightly put it, should, in theory, influence others to maybe step up their game if they're not doing so already. And so, and as you say, because we're all ultimately going to be directly affected by the climate change in some way, shape, or form, and it's really going to take many, if not all, organizations around the world to do their own bit to accelerate that.
Totally. Leaders need to collaborate. Leaders need to
absolutely. Yeah.
And the whole world does. About the supply chain, and the whole world is an interconnected supply chain. So people need to do their bit in the area of influence. Absolutely. And our customers are saying, our gig is making something, but our understanding of carbon and cross building a structure or a building is not our expertise. We want you to lead that bit. So we're saying, yes, we will lead that bit. We will show you the tools. We will help lead you through your journey and let you help reduce your carbon footprint in that portion of the supply chain. And if every organisation takes that approach, we'll solve the problem really quickly.
We'll certainly help it. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Listen, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, and it has gone very, very quick, but we have really reached our final question of the episode, and it's the same one we ask all our guests, which is, if you, Darren Evans, were starting your career again, right back to the beginning, what would be the advice that you would give to your younger self?
That's really easy. Grow others to grow yourself.
Right.
And so why do I say that? If you master a skill when you have to teach it to other people. So if you learn a skill and then train someone else to do it, you'll be better at that skill. You also enable them to grow, and that will push you up to do the next task on the ladder. You know what I mean? So if you're giving someone a hand up, that forces you to take a step up. Grow others to grow yourself.
And recently I've been throwing that back actually at our guests and saying, are you living by that now? Because I think the last 30 minutes of our episode has pretty much answered that question. It certainly sounds like you're living by that, living your own advice.
I think one of the things I've just tried to focus on is, again, professional development. So one of the things I'm working with people now is to develop a 3 horizons professional development plan, which says, what are you going to do in the next 18 months? What's 18 to 5 years, and what's 5 to 10? Because you've got to always have an eye on the long term and do some of those tasks now to prepare you for that step up and to open up your mind. And the real thing is, I take the approach, grow them regardless of whether they're going to stay in your organisation, because you want people to be boomerangs and come back, and that's going out to the world and gathering some more knowledge and then rejoining the organisation might be the very best thing you can do for someone and for the organisation. You just don't want to run a culture where people turn into sticks. When you throw them, they don't come back.
Well, I know for, my sort of partner in crime for developing these podcasts, who's sitting listening into us recording this, is is living proof of that exact thing. She is the boomerang that has come back after a 7-year hiatus. So we're very pleased about that. Darren, it's been a privilege and an honor to talk to you today, and thank you ever so much for giving us some of your time in your very busy life. We're very, very grateful, so thank you ever so much. And that, I guess, leaves me to say that if you would like to find out any more about Impact, maybe you want to watch or read the case study with the work that Impact have done with Calder Stewart, you'll be able to find links to that, plus everything else that you might want links to in the description of where you found today's episode. And of course, don't forget to watch and listen back to our previous episodes, where we've got loads of them to go and enjoy. So that just remains for me to thank Darren Evans again for joining me today. And until the next time, take care.